Okay, shall we begin? Amazing. Hi, everyone. I'm Patrick Teed. I'm a PhD candidate at York University in the Social and Political Thought program and adjunct faculty here. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the final panel for today's Scholar Strike, Building Global Solidarity, Connecting Struggles Against Genocide, Settler-colonialism, Racism, and Imperialism. We currently have four amazing speakers, but we'll have five soon. The fifth is just trapped in the subway, TTC. I'm going to introduce each speaker before they share their remarks, and then hopefully afterwards we'll have time to for all of the speakers to talk across their different presentations and yeah, speak to the theme that's grounding us here today. So let's get to it. We're starting with Sarah G. Malik. Sarah is a Palestinian spoken word poet and writer currently living in Toronto, Canada. She writes on colonization and resistance using magical realism and creative performance. She's performed on numerous literary and community stages in Toronto for over 15 years, including Toronto Poetry Slam, Mayworks Festival of Working, and Toronto International Festival of Authors. She is co-editor of Min Famille, Arab Feminist Reflections on Space and Identity and Resistance, and also an assigned text in my undergraduate feminist political thought class, and winner of 2023 Briar Patch Writers in the Margins contest. So without further ado, welcome, Sarah.
Hi, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me today to be part of your space. As a poet, I am more concerned with the matters of the heart than the mind. The poem that I want to share today is called Annexed Palestine, and it is more of a historical political poem. And the reason I wrote it, it was last year, in response to the focus on October 7th as an isolated event. So this poem today is going to provide the 100-year historical and political context for where we are at today. And so it's called Annexed Palestine. Annexed Palestine is a story that starts and ends with the right of return. 1885. White men strapped in tuxedos discuss business under smoke rings, Rothschild and Co. 14 million for the state of Zion to build 30 settlements. Expel the savages, expel the savages, expel the savages. The Palestinian farmer and the fisherman. That year, for the first time ever in Palestine, the flag of Israel was raised on a settlement they named Rishon LeZion, first to Zion. This is the story of Annexed Palestine. 1896. Theodor Herzl publishes The Jewish State, claiming Palestine a land empty, infested with swamps of malaria and swine. A land without a people, except for the Palestinians, the farmer and the fisherman, except for the Palestinians. Annexed Palestine is a story of expulsion and land grab. 1910, 60,000 Palestinian farmers expelled by ruthless mercenary gangs to be replaced with European Jewish farmers, armed European Jewish farmers, protected by the Jewish Guard to expel the Palestinians and fight those who tried to return. Always fight the Palestinian who tries to return. Annexed Palestine is the story of armed colonial gangs terrorizing an unarmed indigenous population from the very beginning, 1915. The Sykes-Picot Agreement divides the Middle East to facilitate Jewish immigration to Palestine, land sale, building of settlements, militarizing Jewish settlements, and Palestinian transfer from Palestine. 1917, the Balfour Declaration promises to establish a national home for Jewish people in Palestine. Only 1 month after the Balfour Declaration, on December 9th, 1917, terror strikes across Palestine. General Allenby, by order of Winston Churchill, along with the Jewish Legion, armed with Empire military, storms and occupies Jerusalem. Whispers carry across every Palestinian city, town, and village about the British and their colonial gangs 100 times more brutal than the British. Annexed Palestine is the story of a British mandate rule armed and militarized to create a Jewish commonwealth in Palestine. Palestinians resist unarmed. Palestinians resist empire militaries unarmed. 1937, Britain publishes the report of the Royal Commission. Palestine is divided into three, part for the European Jews, part for the Arabs, and part for the British. A committee is established for the transfer of Palestinians from their lands and eliminating Palestinian resistance, and another for arming and training Zionist militias on planned insurrections of Palestinian villages and towns, and to expel Palestinians from their land, 1939, Palestinians revolt. They boycott, they strike, they write, negotiate, compromise, rise up, resist, persist, fully armed empire militaries unarmed. Annexed Palestine is the story of resisting a conspiracy drawn up by warlords and capitalist criminals to create the illusion of a state atop of skeletons and skulls. 1947. The UN partition plan declares the state of Israel on 60% of Palestine. Annexed Palestine is the story of organized and systemic denial of Indigenous peoples' sovereignty over their land. 1948, the Nakba, a catastrophe. The days before no longer led to the next. 750,000 Palestinians terrorized to flee. 530 Palestinian villages and towns vanish. Massacres ensue. من دير ياسين لطبرية لنصر الدين للعباسية everywhere we had grown from ancestor to babies. Colonization is the encapsulation of what used to be in the form of inordinate ornaments like keys, doors, feet, and seeds. Overnight, soil taken away from what makes it sand. Refugization, looting from land, sea, and sky, trees and soil, entire families bombed and corralled out of Palestine to walk in hunger and thirst, feet rubbing sand. Ethnic cleansing is the story of annexed Palestine. 1967, the Nakba, swallowed whole, bone and teeth and corpse, another 300,000 expelled. The UN declares Israeli annexation of Palestinian land illegal, and yet within miles, shots fired at bodies back for what was stolen from them. 1987, first of the Intifada's break. Palestinians resist war economies and empires with rocks and stones. Illegal settlements eat away at Palestine. Colonial guards at checkpoints cage what remains of our human parts. 1993, accords turn treats for the wealthy and genocidal for the rest. Two-state solution for a Palestinian state eternally in talks. Meanwhile, Israeli state on lock. Settlements grow, gun-strapped settlers illegally greed and roam. Israel armed in billions yearly. Palestine unarmed in perpetuity. Israel gains international legitimacy. Palestinians self-ruled by a puppet authority. 2000. Second Intifada breaks. Muhammad al-Durra executed live on camera. Authorities conspire as one occupier, incarcerating resistance, criminalizing dissent, dungeon keepers, kidnapping schemes, dawn raids, scattered screams, midnight curfews, midday sweeps, preparation, refurbished spaces, homes demolished at dusk, villages abducted at gunpoint, children detained, lawyers never present, charges non-existent, verdict always complicit, solitary confinements, trials delayed and delayed and delayed, like Ahmed Manasra, 15 years and still no charges, and still delayed and still sadistic. Our children, their tears are trails to dispossession tales, the resemblance of flesh behind metal gates, their frames growing into the ball and chain. Annexation is caging, enslaving Palestine. 2005, Intifada breaks. Gaza turns resistance. Many intifadas break. The wall is meant to break, and until it breaks, many intifadas will break. 2007, Gaza turns siege. Collective punishment for resistance, besieged. 2008, 2009, Operation Gaza Massacre under siege. Lockheed Martin, Elbite Systems, Raytheon Technologies, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Woodward, and General Electric. Air shows and trade shows showing off the latest in genocidal technologies. BlackRock scoping the future of stolen land, imperialist monopolies conspiring. For gas, for oil pipelines, for coastal beaches and resorts, for shipping lanes, for a returning Messiah, for a land bridge to Africa, for an entrance to the East, for the Mediterranean, for military contractors, and for one less Palestinian. 2010, flotillas murdered for attempting to break siege. 2011, 2012, Operation Gaza Massacre continues under siege. 2014, the Great March of Return. Palestinians peacefully protest to break the siege, dancing debke in a ring of fire. Over 200 murdered, 36,000 severely injured, 9,000 of which were children, and the siege tightens. 2015, children on beaches desecrated. Entire bloodlines eliminated. 2018, 2019, 2021, Gaza massacre now normalized. 2022, 16 years still under siege. Entire generations born and raised under siege. 2023 to date, prison break. Annexed Palestine is the story of the oppressed refusing to be subjugated, refusing to be the violent, absorbing, passive victim. Resistance paratroops across barbed wire. Military domes weather storms of resistance fire. Colonizer humiliated, accelerates mode Gaza genocide. How dare the wretched of the earth break free? Annexed Palestine is the story of the abused breaking free from their abuser. Extermination turns Gaza. No food, no water, no fuel, no light, but the night lights from the bombs bursting in the air, and the twilight from exploding schools and universities and churches and mosques and libraries and bookstores and bakeries and buses and ambulances and markets and generational homes and hospitals and hospitals and hospitals, where press conferences are held amidst a pile of dead small corpses. Our children, they are born out of this dark. They beam out from underneath rubble upon rock, giving proof through the night that the siege turned silencing, weapons used for massacring, turning Gaza to dark. Annexed Palestine, nowhere left to turn. Gaza is all I think about in the dark. Annexed Palestine is the story of over 100 years of resistance against European domination and subjugation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. What an incredibly searing and necessary way to begin the panel. I'd like to welcome our next panelist, Duha El Mardi. Duha is a Sudanese organizer currently based in Chochoke, Montreal. She is a member of the Sudan Solidarity Collective and supports a number of groups and organizations working towards social and climate justice. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Duha to speak.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and for organizing this. I want to start by saying glory to the martyrs of the Sudanese revolution and all civilians who have lost their lives in this current war and the previous ones. And may those who are wounded heal and those who are missing return. I also extend my deep solidarity to the people of Gaza facing genocide and all of Palestine, as well as the people in the Congo, Haiti, Tigray, and all those fighting for peace and justice across the world. And also extending my solidarity with Indigenous struggles for land back, sovereignty, and decolonization on Turtle Island and beyond. So in the spirit of learning about each other's struggles as a way to connect deeper in our solidarities, I'll talk about the situation in Sudan and end with some notes on global solidarity. As I'm speaking to you right now, my newsfeed on Facebook and my Sudani family WhatsApp groups are just an obituary after another. We wake up every day worried that we will have a list of relatives or neighbors who have passed away today, as we did yesterday. Some from the missiles and aerial bombardments, some from stray bullets, some in accidents during evacuation, or from starvation and hunger in their homes, or during the long walks to run away to somewhere safer. Some from dengue fever, malaria, cholera, or any other disease that have been plaguing Sudan since the war, with the collapse of 80% of the healthcare system, which was already a tired healthcare system before the war. And some from heart attacks and grief. That has been the case since April 2023, when the war broke out in the capital of Khartoum 19 months ago between the RSF and the SAF or SAF. That was especially true this past October, which was the deadliest month since the start of the war, with over 20,000 people dying in 1 month. So I'm going to be using the acronyms RSF and SAF or SAF, as they are the two warring factions. The RSF is, or the Rapid Support Forces, they are a paramilitary force formerly known as the Janjaweed militias, commanded by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. They supported the Bashir regime in the Darfur genocide back in the early 2000s, which caused 300,000 deaths and mass displacement of millions of people, many of whom are now twice and thrice displaced after this war. So the SAF, SAF, Sudan's Army or Sudan Armed Forces is commanded by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who has served as a regional army during the Darfur War as well. The IOM says that there have been more than 14 million people displaced since the war started, which is 30% of the population. 3.2 million people have fled the country. Sudan is now the largest displacement crisis in the world. Those who have fled to neighboring Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and other countries encounter immense challenges and frequently receive substandard treatment. The Canadian government's inadequate, slow, and class-based family reunification program is making it difficult for those of us in Canada to bring our families out. The RSF perpetrates a new massacre in Sudan every day. There's so many of them that time will not allow me to list or discuss all of them here. Since the RSF seized Al Jazeera state in central Sudan in October of last year, following the military surrender, it has been the scene of numerous massacres. Since then, the RSF has raided over 400 towns and villages in the state, which is known as the agricultural heartland of Sudan. In a statement from Sudanese journalist and activist Shama'il al-Noor, according to accounts from survivors of Al Jazeera massacres, people fled on foot for days. Along the way, they would stop in small villages to spend the night before continuing their journey, only to find these villages desolate, abandoned by their inhabitants. You might have come across the recent news of the 130 women in eastern Al Jazeera who have committed mass suicide in fear of sexual violence from the RSF. Since the onset of the war, the RSF has systematically abducted, sexually assaulted, and trafficked women, including minors. Today, the siege of Al Hilaliya city in Al Jazeera state enters its 19th day, and the number of martyrs rise to more than 300, with 30,000 people in that city currently under siege. The RSF has also poisoned the water and food sources in Al Hilaliya, resulting in the death of civilians, including children. The testimonies shared by survivors or their relatives and friends have been haunting. One of those is from a survivor from the village of Tambul in Al Jazeera. And it says, a mother ran frantically through the sugarcane fields, carrying her infant to escape from the RSF militia. After distancing herself from them, she discovered that her baby had fallen from the wrap, but she couldn't go back to search for him. Other parts of Sudan that have been historically marginalized and attacked throughout the decades continue to suffer in this war as well. A devastating famine in the Nuba Mountains region of Sudan has claimed the lives of hundreds, with more than 52,000 people suffering from acute malnutrition, according to the SPLM North. Other places, such as Zamzam Camp in North Darfur, also face above famine levels of acute malnutrition. The Darfur states have been facing several types of violence. The violence has ranged from SAF airstrikes to RSF shellings in El Fasher and other parts of Darfur. The RSF has also been conducting ethnic cleansing, targeting the Masalid tribes and other non-Arab tribes. Many factors, including the telecom blackout in many parts of the country, contribute to the deficiency in reporting on Sudan. The existing coverage often decontextualizes the war in Sudan from Sudan's history, including the recent history of the brave revolution of the Sudanese people against the Bashir regime. Instead of portraying the Sudanese people as those who have dared to dream and work for a better world, who are currently facing punishment for this, it often portrays them as passive victims. Of course, a more full picture of this current moment requires us to go all the way back to the various colonizations that took place in Sudan, and also the colonial legacies that have been utilized since the establishment of the nation-state of Sudan in 1956. But in more recent history, President Omar al-Bashir and his brutal, repressive National Congress Party seized power through a military coup and have ruled Sudan since 1989. In addition to the 30 years of hardship Sudanese people faced from this regime, Sudan has also lived through US-imposed sanctions since the Clinton era, which basically isolated the country from the rest of the world. There were many protests across the years, but the most significant period of protests began in December 2018. It's also known as the December Revolution, followed by hundreds of protests and a large-scale 58-day sit-in in front of the military headquarters in Khartoum, which brought in millions of people from across the country. Of course, the sit-in was violently cracked down in June 2019 in what is known as the Khartoum Massacre. Following the massacre, a power-sharing agreement was signed between the civilian representatives and the Transitional Military Council, which is comprised of the SAF and the RSF. And in 2022, the Transitional Military Council conducted a coup against the civilian side. A number of negotiations took place in this period between the coup and the war, including the signing of a US-UN brokered framework agreement in 2022. Across Sudan's political spectrum, including the neighborhood resistance committees and others, this agreement faced widespread rejection. The neighborhood resistance committees, which are a powerful grassroots formation, have resurfaced and played a big role in organizing and mobilizing people during the uprising. The resistance committees continued their slogan of no negotiations, no partnerships, and no dialogue with the Transitional Military Council. The resistance committees also developed the Revolutionary Charter of Establishing People's Power, which is an important and radical political document that engaged more than 8,000 neighborhood resistance committees in its development. The international community ignored all this, viewing it as unrealistic and overly ambitious. These international bodies and Western governments propped these war generals and tried to present them as reformist. This war is a continuation of the earlier wars, an extension of colonial dynamics as a result of various regimes, governments, and counter-revolutionary forces and foreign interventions. Some of these interventions include the Transitional Military Council during the Trump administration normalized relations with Israel in 2020 and signed the Abrahamic Accords in 2021 in exchange for the removal of Sudan from the state sponsors of the terrorism list, and also a $1.2 billion loan. The Sudanese population, which has always stood in solidarity with the Palestinian people against the Israeli occupation, opposed this action. Israel has strategic interest in Sudan and has long been involved in Sudan's affairs. The Gulf countries have been a key player in the war and in exploiting Sudan's resources and land for decades. Many reports suggest that the United Arab Emirates is providing various forms of support to the RSF militia in this conflict. The RSF militia is particularly responsible for many of the gold mines, and Sudan's gold is smuggled into the United Arab Emirates. Sudan is the third largest gold producer in Africa. A Middle East Eye report from January this year shows us that there's a network of ammunition of supply lines from the RSF that comes from the UAE via Chad, Libya, Uganda, and elsewhere. The same report also mentions how the UAE, a key US ally, has been working to stifle any attempt by the people for democracy in the region, such as those in Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, and Libya, and is currently supporting the RSF in Sudan. The Biden administration also recently authorized the sale of $2.2 billion worth of weapons to the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia just last month. Canada has a history of participating in war-related activities, frequently ignoring private entities like the PR lobbying firm in Montreal, Dickens and Matson, which is owned by a former Mossad agent, which worked to polish the image of the RSF to help them build relations with foreign governments. Other interventions include the Russia and Ukraine war, as well as the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which has continuously intervened through neoliberal economic reform programs, including in 2018, which contributed to deteriorating living conditions of people. What I mentioned today about the war in Sudan is merely a drop from a large bucket. but it shows us that the war in Sudan is a feminist issue, it's a class issue, it's a climate justice issue, a migrant justice issue. Any issue I can name fits in this context. And also, the war in Sudan is neither a civil war, nor is it exactly a proxy war. It is a counter-revolutionary war that serves the interest of greedy local actors and global imperialists. And the December 2018 revolution is a continuation of a rich history of resistance and popular uprisings. The Sudanese people have never been silent, and certainly are not silent now either. Our survival in this moment and future moments hinges on our ability and willingness to see and treat our struggles as interconnected and against imperialism. In The Silences of NGO Discourse, Isa Shivji says, during the revolutionary moments of the 1960s and 70s, when the national liberation movement was at its height, it used to be said that we should think globally and act locally. This summed up four fundamental ideas. One, imperialism was global and oppressed all peoples worldwide, so it must be understood in its global context. Two, imperialism would have to be fought at the level of its local manifestations. The concrete analysis of the concrete situation was underlined. Three, the slogan expressed the international solidarity of all peoples across the globe against imperialism. Four, imperialism had to be clearly understood and correctly described in all aspects so as to conduct an organized and conscious struggle against it. Finally, to wrap up, I want to leave us with words from Robin D.G. Kelly that I find inspiring, and I hope that you do as well. And I'm going to quickly read it from David Austin's Fear of Black Nation. And it says, we're living in a political age where everything is based on exchange. Solidarity is somehow supposed to be like a market economy. What it means to be a revolutionary is to fight for those who may not fight for you. And I know that's a hard thing to do in this age of pessimism. But we have a long history of fighting for others, even people we've never seen before. If we could learn to do that, then we could actually learn to love. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dua. Excellent presentation, and yeah, excellent note to close it on. At this point, I would like to welcome Erica Violet Lee to speak. Erica is a Nehiyaw poet, writer, scholar, and community organizer from Saskatoon, Treaty 6 territory. Erica holds an M.Ed in social justice education from OASI at the University of Toronto. Erica, are you able to join us right now? Okay.
I am. Can you hear me all right? Okay. My name is Erica. Erica Femindon. Erica Nsikathon. I am here in Toronto, just visiting a friend, and I wanted to share some thoughts with you, I guess, in this space. Thank you so much, people who spoke before. I really enjoy the work that Scholars Strike Canada does in terms of reminding us of the stakes, returning us constantly to the stakes of what we're doing together, the stakes of doing our work in this time together and returning to each other's thoughts. So I just kind of wanted to share something that I've been thinking about. One, I'm planning a road trip down south to see Greta Van Fleet in Nashville, Tennessee. I look at landmarks near the concert venue, trying to figure out where to stay. One name shows up on Google Maps. I hate Google Maps. Carton. After the third time noticing it, I type into the search bar Carton and learn that the full name is Carton Plantation. On the website, Carton is described as a farm. It was built in 1826 by enslaved people. You can purchase tickets for $30 or $40 US, featuring hour-long tours of the grounds and the main house. For $25, there is a Slavery and the Enslaved tour that describes enslavement as one of America's biggest paradoxes, a nation where all men are created equal, but millions were denied basic freedom. This tour is not recommended for children. There is a gift shop. 2, at my reserve, Other Child First Nation in Saskatchewan, the residential school in prison in Dalmas called St. Henry, where I was in 1901 by the Roman Catholic Church, result of Canadian policy. The school was burned down in 1948 by a fire started by the kings held in captivity there. It was never rebuilt. 3. As a kid, I had a great memory. I memorized my favorite poems, my favorite math equations, my favorite encyclopedia entry. I was really proud of it. I was raised by my mother, Michelle, and her mother, Mary, who I called Nana. Nana's hair was bright dark red, and I used to spend lots of time brushing it while we watched movies together. 4. I'm taking Via Rail's Canadian line Saskatoon to Toronto. Being on a train in the middle of the night makes me think of you. It's so quiet, and it feels like I'm the only one awake, so I keep watch, hoping that my witnessing allows for sweeter dreams in this train car. I look at each person and wonder what they're dreaming. On May 27th, 2021, mass grave of at least 250 Native children was officially announced as uncovered at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in Kamloops, Peshakwatnut First Nation, in the city of Kamloops, British Columbia. The outcome of this long-awaited reckoning involves fulfilling Native Nation. Story. In Saskatchewan, Battleford Agency Tribal Chief, Saskatchewan, conduct ground penetrating radar work to locate graves that our old folks have told us were there for decades. Next, on plantations, deceased enslaved folks, including children, were buried. The noble stories were told up north involved people digging graves for children as well. Rarely did our ancestors receive proper burials or grave markers. I wonder if anyone else thinks about this when they're looking at Google Maps. Laboring the soil has always been work. Knowing the soil has always been soil has been hell and it's been refuge. The soil remembers our hands, our bodies. Now as then. When we talk about Black and Native freedom and captivity and fugitivity, we don't draw exact parallels. We can't conflate. We can't pretend to know one another. We need to keep learning. Our experiences are not the same, but they're the same. Anti-blackness operates in ways that underpin capitalism. Anti-blackness, I learned, is the reason Indigenous savage, something to be tamed and controlled, fenced in and imprisoned for the safety of settlers and their property. So much comes back to property, so much comes back to naming. We have an Anishinaabe tribe who started sharing Asima, tobacco seeds, with her Black and Native friends in Toronto, teaching us how to grow. The seeds are tiny and dark, sprout quickly, and eventually emerge in thick, fragrant, sticky leaves. In 2021, Canadian mining and exploration company SSC Leveland offered pro bono services to the Battleford's tribal agency of use of the ground penetrating radar search for the bodies of children and important. I look at SSC Leveland website. They looked at their records and realized they're responsible for similar battles, legal, physical, spiritual, against Indigenous communities protecting land and life around the world, from Asia to Africa, Bangladesh, Saskatchewan. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Erica. And just for the conversation, I just want to flag for you, your sound was a little garbled. It was different from what it was when you first came into the chat. So it might be that where the sound is. Oh no worries. Just want you to know for the conversation part. It might be that it's coming from a different microphone than it was earlier. I don't know. But yeah, thank you so much. And the transnational and questions of coalition across difference that you're raising, I think, are so central to this panel. Next, we have Gary Kinsman, who has made it off of getting trapped on the subway. Welcome, Gary.
I'm sorry, could we ask to stop sharing the screen?
Yes.
Thank you. so we can. The screen is still being shared.
There we go.
Oh,
Perfect.
thank you. Great.
We have Gary Kinsman. Gary is involved in Abolitionist Pride, No Pride in Policing Coalition, and Queers for Palestine. He is a longtime queer liberation, anti-racist, Palestine solidarity, and abolitionist activist. He's the author of The Regulation of Desire, Queer Histories, Queer Struggles, and co-author of the Canadian War on Queers. So without further ado, Gary, we welcome you to speak.
Thanks, Patrick. People are hearing me okay? Yeah, okay. Just wanted to check in on that. There was actually a health emergency on the subway, which I got caught up in. So it wasn't your usual infrastructural collapse, which is taking place on the TTC all the time now. So I'm speaking today in terms of both rage and grief. Rage in solidarity with all of the people rising up all over the planet against the various forms of genocide that are currently taking place, especially in terms of the extermination of the Palestinians in northern Gaza, the thousands of Lebanese people who are being killed, but also the ongoing genocides in Congo, Sudan, and many other places as well. And I'm also speaking in grief, because I think it's important for us to understand that while rage can be really important politically, like it was, for instance, in the AIDS Coalition to Act Up, our rage against governments and states basically sentencing people to die in the context of AIDS, that was really useful, but it was also important for us to be able to embody and feel the grief that we need to be feeling for all of the people who are being killed right now. I think we also have to recognize that the solidarity that we need to be building has a somewhat different character than what we've built on in the past. Obviously, it needs to be built on what we've done in the past, but there's now an extension of the white, Western, racial capitalist regimes and states into a much more offensive position in terms of their attacks on people, especially in the global south. We see that perhaps most visibly in terms of Palestine and Lebanon right now, but it's actually occurring in a much more profound way. And it means that the forms of solidarity we need to build in some ways maybe need to be more profound, and they need to be incredibly important in attacking anti-Black racism as central to what's going on, and also the forms of racism being mobilized against Palestinian and Arab identified people. So I also just wanted to talk for a moment about global solidarity. Obviously, solidarity is in some ways crossing boundaries, including the boundaries of nation states in terms of how we build solidarity. It's also about building solidarity across grounds of other lines of social power, whether it be gender or sexuality, all sorts of different forms of race and so on. But one way in which solidarity has been, I think, limited in its understanding is it's almost understood as there's a number of groups that now stand in solidarity with each other, but they stay the same during that whole process of solidarity. And what I think solidarity needs to be understood as a transformative process. We learn things from other people. We get transformed in the process of organizing solidarity. I wanted to talk for a moment about the Congo and Sudan. I know that they're being talked about in other places, and I'm sorry that I missed the earlier talk in this session because I was delayed. It's really important to understand genocide in Congo is actually organized quite specifically around the needs of capitalist, mining, and computer firms. And their priorities and their profit rates are put ahead of the death and destruction of Black people, who in many ways are also forced into forms of forced slavery in terms of the forms of labor imposed on them. In Sudan, and I'm operating on the basis of what I've learned from people from Sudan and Sudan solidarity people, is that what you're still seeing is attempts to destroy the residues that were left over from the popular revolution that occurred in Sudan. So what you're actually seeing is attempts to destroy the gains that the people in the Sudan actually gained at earlier points. Now, I'm going to talk mostly about Palestine and global solidarity in that context. I think it's important for us to understand that one of the ways in which people and queers in Palestine and queer and trans people in solidarity with Palestine have understood what we're being asked to do is the calls that have come from queers in Palestine itself, which is a group within Palestine and also in the Palestinian diaspora that actually asked for people to take action. 550 different organizations around the world decided to do that. Many of the major pride organizations within the Canadian state, including Pride Toronto, decided not to do that and instead to express pride in genocide, which I think is what they've actually been doing in practice. We also have, of course, all of the demands coming from the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions campaign, which includes a lot of queer positive organizing on the part of the BDS campaign, so that there's things that have actually been groups that have actually been calling for us to engage in active solidarity with people in Palestine. And there also increasingly are, and I just want to mention this because it's actually a sign of a certain type of hope and optimism, is that there's also been the generation of No Pride in Genocide. Initially based on what happened in 2021 in terms of the resistance to the residential school system and settler colonialism and genocidal practice against Indigenous people in the Americas and on Turtle Island, but now also deployed in the context of Palestine. So it's important to understand that St. John's Pride, Fredericton Pride, Charlottetown Pride actually ruptured and destroyed all of their relationships with TD Bank in organizing this year. And they will be raising that resolution with all of the Pride committees all across the country. So that for me is actually a really important act of solidarity and support. Finally, questions of solidarity also raise for us, first of all, we need to listen to and learn from the people who are initiating their struggles and calling for us to support them. But we also need to, in that context, talk about what are the most effective forms of actions for us to be engaging in terms of solidarity. And for me, it's becoming increasingly clear that mass demonstrations are absolutely crucial, but in and of themselves are not enough, and that we need much more what I would describe as mass or semi-mass forms of direct action. And I guess I'll just end off with an announcement coming from World Beyond War and other groups that this Saturday, November 16th, is a day of action all across the Canadian state against the Canadian companies that are currently manufacturing the F-35 components that go to the States and therefore circumvent all of the export permits of the Canadian state that are being used right now to kill and destroy people in Gaza and in Lebanon. And some of those components, one of those components is actually only made in Canada. And interestingly enough, people in Ottawa actually disrupted and sabotaged that particular site last week. And for me, that's actually inspiring. If we can actually do material damage and disruption to the Canadian war machine supporting the Israeli state and genocidal actions, that for me is really important. So I want to speak in solidarity with everyone who's here. I want to speak in solidarity with us intensifying and extending our activism and solidarity. And I'm really glad to be here today. And I'm really glad to be able to participate in Scholars Strike Canada once again. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gary. That was all excellent. And so to close for the presentations, I'll now invite Beverly Bain to speak. Beverly is a Black radical feminist, queer activist scholar, co-founder of Scholars Strike Canada. She teaches in women, gender, and sexuality studies in the Department of Historical Studies at the University of Toronto, UTM. So Beverly, we'd like to welcome you to speak.
Thank you. I want to thank my co-panelist for all of your contributions. It was amazing. And thank you, Patrick, for agreeing to moderate this panel. I want to focus, and I want to focus on looking back at the kinds of connections and convergences that Black radical struggle has built with Palestine. I also want to deepen that understanding of solidarity because for many of us, in terms of the ways in which our struggles converge, such as Black struggles with Palestinian struggles, Black struggles with Indigenous struggles, it goes beyond what we understand as solidarity. Why? Because our lives, there's a stake in our livability in relation to the lives of Palestinians, the lives of Black people, the lives of Indigenous people. There's a stake in the way in which our lives are embedded together, are intertwined together, right? And I think it's really important for us to think about, when we think of solidarity, I don't think we can think that we're all in solidarity in the same way. I think our solidarity, understanding of solidarity, which is why I prefer the word struggle than solidarity. I prefer, working across struggle, living in struggle, because I feel when we talk about struggle, we talk about an actual embeddedness, a kind of knotting, an understanding of the ways in which our lives and the complexities of our lives are intertwined. That is not to say that it doesn't diverge. Of course it does, right? What we're witnessing in Palestine is specific to Palestinian history, Palestinian lives, and the way in which the Western world have constructed the state of Israel, and the way the decisions are being made, and the way that Israel is continued to be supported in its ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing by the West, the way that is foisted and perpetuated, as legitimate. So we are seeing this war, this ongoing, as Sarah indicated, she gave us an entire framework and the history, the 100 years of history that we are witnessing in Palestine. But I want us also to recognize that some of us, even though that this actual genocide isn't taking place in the same way, that many of us are, like Black people, are living in the afterlife of slavery. So when we stop to think Indigenous people are living in an ongoing situation where genocide and extraction and dispossession continues. And here is where a convergence takes place, right? Where we can see how we are intertwined together in a struggle for our livability, for our everyday ongoing lives, so that if we don't pay attention to what's happening elsewhere, like in Palestine, we're also not recognizing how our livability is tied up in that, and how we cannot, under any circumstances, assume that we can continue to live free and liberated if Palestine isn't free and liberated. Does that make any sense? So I just want to, I want to talk about the way in which, it is generally agreed that, the resurgence of Black Palestinian transnational solidarity began in the summer of 2014. I want to say that here in Canada, Black radical feminist, and I know in the US, with the Black feminist, the Combahee Collective. I want to argue that, and to say that Black radical, anti-capitalist, anti-colonial feminists have played a fundamental role, right, in the struggle in support of Palestinians and Palestine, and to see that as an intricate kind of struggle with Black and Palestinian lives, right? So that's going back decades and decades. Yes, in 2014, we saw a resurgence of that connection, right? With the Ferguson shootings, the shootings of Black people, of Michael Brown, and on and on. We saw that happen right up to 2020. We saw another resurgence in which, Palestinians were sending all kinds of tributes from Palestine, right? From their, Palestinians continue to live in an open air prison. They're sending all sorts of supportive words from that space to Blacks in the US, to Blacks everywhere who were being shot and killed by police, recognizing the role that police and the prison industrial complex have played in the lives of Black people and continue to play on a daily basis, right? In fact, Nura Ericott published When I See Them, I See Us, and it was, a series of photographs that she published that showed, that captured the common struggles of Black and Palestinian communities. In 1988, the Black Women's Collective, known then, and published, as part of the Black Women's Collective, they published a series called Our Lives. And in 1988, they invited Angela Davis. And one of the things that was clear and in fact, it was titled, organizing, around global struggles, organizing around global struggles. There was always that knowing among Black radical queer feminists that we have to mobilize globally. And in bringing Angela Davis, who spoke about the importance of supporting Palestine and making the links of Black and Palestinians in the struggle for freedom and liberation, they made sure that they connected, they built this entire event around collecting with global feminists who were living in the diaspora here in Canada, right? So they brought together feminists who were Korean, who were Latin American, who were Asian, East and South Asian, Filipino, etc., together, right, to have these conversations. Women who were engaged in dialogue, engaged in struggle, engaged in activism, engaged in protest for justice and for livable lives against sexism, against racism, against lesbophobia and homophobia, against imperialism, against colonialism, and brought together Indigenous feminists as well. So this was always the history of Black radical queer feminist, and I think it was also the history of Palestinian left-wingers, Palestinian radical feminists in Palestine, and as well as Palestinians and Black left radicals as well. So I'm wanting to show the connection in terms of this work and how much, which is why when we look at what's happening today, we see that, Black radical feminists, Palestinian feminists who are radical, we see Asian feminists who are radical, we see these women actually spearheading these struggles in a particular way, that actually speak to taking risk, that speak to understanding that struggle is more than just extending, a heartfelt, recognition that this is happening, but it's also about how we together, think, conceptualize, reconceptualize, how we engage, language differently, how we engage art, so that they speak across and beyond and to us, but they speak to creating something different, a different world that we can all live, liberated people, multiple worlds that are free, liberated, living side by side, having their specificities, but also recognizing that we converge as we struggle for freedom and, and liberation. Dion Brand in her prologue to Gaza said, and I'm quoting from her because I found this very impactful. She said, and I'm quoting a portion of that, "But of all the things I lost when I lost hearing was the sound of human animals." And we know that term was used by the Israelis to describe the Palestinians to degrade and to debase and to justify their bombings and the ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestine and Palestinians. How did you come to be human animals, they ask. We were born, I told them. The regulators and the fascists along each perpendicular, with the least time on earth to live, signed off on the old fantasies at press conferences. The editors printed their carnage again like welcome news, and I was in a ship again. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. Yeah, wonderful remarks to kind of actually bring a lot of the pieces together and also start our conversation with one another. So yeah, I was struck by so many threads of what you all were speaking to, the kind of like long histories of catastrophe that are informing these moments. Obviously the role of the international order and global capitalism in maintaining them. But I think I'm really struck by, and maybe especially with the kind of time we have, the kind of urgency with which you all spoke to the crises of our contemporary moment. And so, yeah, that question of the political that especially came up, different contexts of solidarity, or Bev's provocation of struggle over solidarity, but especially thinking about kind of all of us differently positioned in the imperial core as we are, this proximity, geographic proximity to this imperialist violence, again, as differently positioned as we all are to it, kind of, yeah, what is like the political question for these kinds of, this broader structure of exploitation, international domination, racial capitalism that you've also acutely highlighted? Which is a big question, so there can be small answers as well. Kind of an impossible question, but
so you're leaving it open for anyone to go first, is what you said.
Yes. And another way in too could be maybe what political actions or moments of politics are you investing in right now, or where are you looking to respond to the totality of violence?
A good question. Sarah, do you want to go?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, in the context of Palestine in the current moment, it's a very direct and practical action is to target the arms that are being created. And these are direct actions that have been done, such as that Gary pointed out about the factory producing the F-35 components. This to me, I mean, I'm not an academic or a politician, but in the context of the history, even in the poem, I was trying to emphasize the disparity in terms of what is seen as armed and who can carry arms and who is allowed to resist with arms versus this context that the victim of colonialism. And I think this applies for Indigenous people here as well, in that they are not allowed to carry arms, that the victim needs to have a much higher moral standing than the colonizer and the way that the colonizer behaves. And I believe that this is a contradiction that needs to be definitely worked on in more direct actions through targeting the armed companies and policies that Canada has in terms of arming Israel, but also on a more theoretical level in terms of dismantling this idea that who is a terrorist and who isn't, and what kind of power structure are we working on. If the colonizer is within the context of being a colonizer, resistance by any means necessary is not only a value but imperative. And I think those are cornerstones that I believe that not only will support Palestine, but in the idea of framing it as an abused and an abuser, it falls within the context of any colonial context.
I see an immediate connection in that response too with both Gary and Bev, what you were saying about solidarity as a kind of transformative principle, rather than a kind of thing that maintains these discrete categories. um, and how we relate to like the struggle of anti-colonial action by Palestinians in Gaza, how we respond to anti-colonial action, by Indigenous people in the Americas, Black people in the Americas, Black people on the continent. But I think this question of like what is solidarity? Is solidarity the way to relate to it is key here and kind of underneath a lot of these comments. So I'd love to hear more of you think with that as well.
Maybe I can go
Yeah,
first.
I'll go after. Go ahead.
I accept what Bev has said about struggle. Struggle is actually like really central, but I mean the other thing is to recognize that solidarity is used a lot and perhaps overused and not necessarily used in the ways in which it should be. Because for me, if solidarity is actually a practice of transformation, which is what it needs to be, it's about learning from other people and transforming who we are. So it's actually itself a transformative process. Obviously, that's key to what struggle in all of its different aspects is all about as well. I think this also raises some important questions about how it is that central to the campaigns that are going on against people in Palestine, Congo, Sudan, is that those people's lives do not register at all with authorities and powers in Western racial capitalist regimes. And this is something that should actually make us incredibly angry. Certain lives are valued, other lives are completely of no consequence and no importance. So that, at the minimum, tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed. And that seemingly doesn't matter to the official forces in the Canadian state, who will instead think that Palestinian solidarity activists are intrinsically anti-Semitic in terms of the notions that they've now adopted. And maybe I'll just make one final comment about what happened in Amsterdam last week. I mean, I was in Amsterdam in July, so I sort of like visually could actually see where some of this stuff was taking place. So the Israelis moved football supporters of a team who actually have a history of violence against people, including in Greece and other places. They moved hundreds of them into the streets of Amsterdam, where they let them run rampages, including with Mossad agents being part of it, against people in Amsterdam, including the Arab areas of Amsterdam. When some Moroccans actually decided to actually fight back against these racist chants, the burning and destruction of Palestinian flags, they were labeled as sort of anti-Semitic. And there now are calls in Amsterdam by the right-wing parties that now rule the Netherlands that the Moroccans should be deported because they're intrinsically anti-Semitic. So I just wanted to sort of like connect a number of those different things together. So, I mean, we're dealing with a global class and race war that I think we actually have to address and not let it only be waged by those people who have social power against us, but we also have to pick it up from the other side in many diverse types of ways. Thanks.
I just want to pick up, if that's okay, from from what was just said. Sarah, thank you for your piece, and Gary, and I want to say that what you just said, Gary, in terms of what we're witnessing, and the ongoing attacks, the vicious attacks that we're witnessing, on as we're seeing on Palestine, as we're seeing on Moroccans, as we're seeing on groups of people, that this is historic, that they're up, and the idea that that certain people's lives do not count. This is historic. There are certain people's lives who have never counted. Black lives have never counted, right? We're seeing that Palestinian lives does not count. right? We're seeing that. We've seen Indigenous lives have never counted. They have lives that have never been counted, right? In historically, these lives have always been rendered disposable. So this is not new. What we are actually seeing, I think, is a wave that, white ethno-nationalism and white supremacy have exploded to such extent that any way in which, and that white ethno-nationalism and that white supremacy and supremacist idea is enfolded in capitalism. It's not a separate entity. It's very folded in, so that you don't have to be white, look white to support that. You just have to invest in a particular kind of narrative and a particular kind of thinking about how the world should be governed that falls into that, right? That mimics that plays that out. So that, for instance, when we look at what is happening in terms of, the kind of support that the state of Israel is getting, in spite of the fact that we are blatantly seeing a genocide happening, and people are expecting us all to pretend that this is not this is not real, and this is some kind of video game or something, and this is not happening, and people are still saying that Israel has a right in self-defense. I mean, to even engage on that level and to have that somehow be normalized, as someone had said that, like to have that normalized, and for us to be satisfied with that, or to assume that we are not impacted by that in any way, is actually really fundamentally problematic. So the question comes up in strategy. Yes, protest is important. We have to do that. But what do we mean when we say building global struggle? And global struggle that is radical, that is anti-capitalist, that is anti-colonial. I don't think everybody's prepared to build that kind of struggle. I think we have to be clear. Look what's happening in Sudan and Congo, and we heard that. We're not hearing about what's happening in Sudan and Congo, and we're only hearing from our allies who are telling us what's going on. It's not in the news. You have to read alternative news to find out what's going on. It's not an issue, because the Western media is not ready for that. They're not ready. Some they're not prepared to see this as something relevant, right? This is a squabble between these people, right? This is how it's positioned, right? Their interest is not somehow being undermined, is what that is, right? Their economic and political interest is not being undermined in that war in Sudan and Congo enough for them to pay attention. It is not seeping out. It is not interfering with Western imperialism and Western colonial, agendas, right? So that's what happens. So we see this is happening. So the question becomes what it is that we mean by a global, revolutionary struggle or global liberation struggle. And I think there are many parts to it, of course. There is, the kind of work that we are already doing, right? I mean, I would even go so far. I mean, Sarah raised the thing about arms, right? I will even go so far to say, is that an alternative? I mean, that used to be one at one time, right? It used to be, I mean, there were Black liberation struggles. There were struggles in the Caribbean. Everybody picked up arms during those moments. There was the Algerian War, right? So is this at all possible in this realm, in this that maybe there is the need for all different kinds of struggles, all different ways, and that is one of the things that might be necessary. And for people to say that that is not at all an alternative, or that we should not be speaking about that, or that is terrorism, I think we have to challenge, as Sarah says, we have to challenge what this concept of terrorism is. We have to take that back. We have to turn that on its head. This is defense. This is life. This is livability. I'm gonna stop. I know we're out of time. I'm sorry. I think we should give people the last word, though. I took up time, but
yeah, I was gonna say that was an excellent kind of note to close on. I have a prompt that actually lets people have the last word and still lets us close quickly. Prompt I learned from Christina Sharp, and I really liked it, which is to ask people to think of one word that they're thinking on or struck them during the panel. And so I think I was waffling with a few, but right now I think I'm thinking about risk. And I invite you all to contribute a word.
I think for me, it's anti-capitalist. I know we think about it a lot, but it's really coming into practical terms in the current global moment. And yeah, what does that mean? Because it's invasive.
We can't think about it enough. We can always use that word.
I have a word. Can you hear me? My word is time.
I have a word as well, but I was wondering if there's like a minute. I wanted to respond to the earlier question around, what people are sort of working on in the moment. And I think in the context of Sudan, as you mentioned earlier, I'm a member of the Sudan Solidarity Collective, and part of the work that we do is that we directly support mutual aid efforts in Sudan and emergency response rooms. These are, frontline workers in Sudan that have really kind of been left to really, a lot of all these big organizations and NGOs that have been in Sudan for decades have, fled very early on in the war. And so Sudanese people really kind of are left, those on the front lines to do this work, despite being, constantly targeted from both sides of the war. And so we work to support ERRs in Khartoum, in their 4 states and other parts of Sudan, and other grassroots mutual aid efforts as well. And at the same time, trying to kind of work on political education, because it is something that we're really kind of fighting right now with this war. Is we're fighting against historical amnesia that's happening even within our own people because of the level of destruction that we are faced with. It is, it becomes very difficult for so many of us to have moments of hope and try to kind of reconnect with, what has led to all of this and kind of work towards addressing that. There's also, a movement that is growing right now that is calling for boycotting of the United Arab Emirates, and I think it is an important sort of work that needs to be adopted in more and more spaces. And I think on a larger level for Sudanese diaspora, we're also constantly fighting exhaustion, as really the diaspora has really been left to carry all of the burden of what's happening in Sudan. And also we're fighting despair at the same time, because the way that, the gains that we've gotten from the revolution and the years of the revolution was so much hope for so many of us. And so, afterwards going through the military coup and the, massacre and the dispersing of the protest and all of that, that has been a series of, just kind of shock after shock after shock that we never really kind of grasped the gravity of all of that. And then leading, of course, to the war. And so, the work that we're also trying to do is trying to hold space for grief and mourning. We're watching our parents and our grandparents completely uprooted from their homes, not even having space to mourn their lost ones, because we're all scattered all over the world. So doing that work also of trying to hold space for that, trying to hospice what used to be, and think of, think also at the same time of how can we work towards birthing the new, but also understanding that the birthing of the new is so connected with the collective global birthing of the new, not just, what's happening in Sudan. But yeah, and I think my word really, I really like what Beverly said about struggle. So I think that that's my word.
Thank you so much. Gary, Bev, Gary? No? You're muted right now.
Revolutionary struggle, but I mean, I think I've had enough time to say things, so thank you.
Did you say last word? Just one word?
Single word.
I would say risk. That we need to risk it all.
Mhm. Yeah, and that kind of beautifully bookends. That was my word. So
Oh,
that's
sorry.
perfect. No, that's wild.
I'm in your head. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. So perfect note to kind of end on. I want to thank everyone. First, I want to thank all of the panelists for your incredible contributions. I want to thank Alessandra Jodhan for working the tech. I want to thank everyone here that's listening, that's participating in Scholar Strike and joining us. And this was the last panel for the day, but it's not the last thing for the day. There is going to be some more beautiful poetry from Erica Violet Lee that technically was supposed to start 3 minutes ago. But I think I don't know. I'll let Bev, you maybe.
We're gonna go. We have to get off this link and move to the other link. So please join us on the link that says Erica Violet Lee Poet, and we'll follow there. Thank you very much, Patrick, and everyone else.
Okay, stream's ended. Thank you guys.